The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and flowing evening gowns. A man in a worn suit stepped through the golden doors, clutching his young daughter's hand tightly. Whispers cut through the air like knives. "Who let him in?" A server blocked their path. "Sir, this is a private gala." Guests snickered behind champagne glasses. "He looks lost. Wrong place. Buddy?" The man's face burned red with shame. He turned to leave. Then suddenly, from the stage, a woman in a stunning gown came running down, her voice echoing through the ballroom. "Daddy!" The entire hall froze in shock. Meet Ethan Hale, 37 years old, single father. His hands tell his story better than words ever could. Calloused from loading trucks at dawn, stained from washing dishes until midnight, scarred from construction work on weekends. His only suit hangs in a closet that's seen better days. The shoulders are worn thin from too many job interviews. The fabric faded from too many desperate attempts to look presentable. But when he puts it on, his 7-year-old daughter Lily sees something different. "Daddy, you look like a superhero," she says every time, her small hands smoothing down his lapels with the seriousness of a royal dresser. Lily draws pictures of her father in that suit, in her crayon masterpieces. He's flying above skyscrapers, cape flowing behind him. She doesn't see the patches or the frayed cuffs. She sees her hero coming home after saving the world, one honest day's work at a time. Their apartment is small but filled with love. The walls are covered with Lily's artwork. Each drawing tells their story. There's one of them eating cereal for dinner because the electricity bill was due. Another shows them dancing in the kitchen while rain leaks through the ceiling into a bucket. 2 years ago, everything changed in a heartbeat. Sarah, Ethan's wife and Lily's mother, was driving home from her nursing shift when a drunk driver ran a red light. The hospital bills that followed buried them deeper than the grief. But Ethan promised Sarah he'd give Lily everything she deserved, even if it meant working 3 jobs. In his pocket, he carries his father's broken pocket watch. The hands stopped moving years ago, but Lily calls it their lucky charm. She believes it holds all their wishes inside, waiting for the right moment to set them free. "Time doesn't matter when you have love, Daddy," she tells him with the wisdom only children possess. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Lily had begged to see the pretty lights downtown. The charity gala at the Grandview Hotel was lighting up the entire block. Ethan planned to walk by, let her look through the windows, maybe buy her a hot chocolate from a street vendor. But then a red balloon escaped from the hotel's entrance. Lily chased it like it was made of pure magic. Before Ethan could stop her, she'd followed it right through the hotel's revolving doors. He had no choice but to follow. Inside the hotel, everything gleamed. The marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers that cost more than Ethan would make in a lifetime. Women in designer gowns glided past like swans on a golden lake. Men in $1,000 suits discussed business deals over champagne that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. This was Richard Lane's world, the billionaire philanthropist who owned half the city. His charity galas were legendary. Tonight's event was raising money for children's hospitals, but the ticket price could have fed a family for months. Ethan had read about Lane in newspapers left behind at the diner where he washed dishes. A man who'd built an empire from nothing, they said, but now he lived in a tower so high he'd forgotten what the ground looked like. What Ethan didn't know was that Richard Lane's daughter, Sophia, was watching from the stage. The poised CEO who ran the family foundation with an iron fist and a golden heart. She was about to change everything. The moment Ethan stepped into the ballroom, every conversation paused like a record scratch. His worn suit stood out like a patch of weeds in a rose garden. Lily's small hand gripped his tighter as heads turned their way. "Look, Daddy, it's like a fairy tale," Lily whispered, her eyes wide with wonder at the sparkling chandeliers and flowing gowns. But the fairy tale was about to become a nightmare. A woman in pearls leaned toward her companion. Security must be slipping. How did they get in? Her voice carried further than she intended, or maybe she wanted it to. A man in a tuxedo snorted. Tonight's auction, not adoption services. Someone should tell him. The laughter rippled through the crowd like poison. Ethan's face burned red. He'd faced rejection before, but never with his daughter watching. The hotel manager appeared like a shark sensing blood. His smile was sharp and cold. Sir, I'm going to need to see your invitation. Ethan's mouth went dry. My daughter saw the balloon and this is a private event, $5,000 per plate. The manager's voice cut through the murmur of conversations. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. More whispers. Sharper now. 5,000? He probably doesn't make that in a month. Look at that suit. Goodwill special. Someone should call security before he asks for handouts. An elderly man with a gold watch chain laughed coldly. Next, he'll be asking us to adopt his little charity case. Lily tugged on Ethan's jacket. Daddy, why are they being mean? The question hit him harder than any insult. He knelt down to her level, his voice gentle despite the storm raging in his chest. Sometimes people forget their manners, sweetheart, but we're going to leave now. But the pretty lights, we can see them from outside. As Ethan stood, a woman in a dress that sparkled with diamonds blocked their path. Her smile was razor thin and cutting. You know, she said loudly enough for half the room to hear. There's a McDonald's down the street. Much more your speed. The crowd erupted in laughter. Cruel, delighted laughter that echoed off the marble walls. Ethan felt smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. But it wasn't for himself. It was for Lily, who was looking around with confusion and hurt in her bright eyes. A photographer lifted his camera with a predatory grin. This'll make tomorrow's front page. Make sure you get the kid in the shot. Someone called out. More laughter. More stares. More whispers that felt like needles in his skin. A security guard started moving through the crowd toward them, hand reaching for his radio. The manager pointed at Ethan like he was marking a target. Ethan picked up Lily, holding her close to shield her from the cruelty. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, trembling. We're leaving, he said quietly. Good riddance, the pearl-wearing woman muttered. Some people just don't know their place. But as he turned toward the exit, fighting through the sea of designer gowns and judgmental stares, something extraordinary happened. From the stage, Sophia Lane froze. Her speech notes scattered to the floor as she recognized a face she'd never forgotten. A face that had saved her life 8 years ago. The man who'd carried her from a burning dormitory when she was just a college sophomore. The man whose strong arms had pulled her from smoke and flames while others ran the other way. The man who'd stayed with her until the ambulance arrived, holding her hand and telling her she was going to be okay. The man she'd been searching for ever since. Ethan Hale, her hero, her savior. The reason she was alive to stand on this stage tonight. In the hospital that night, delirious from smoke inhalation. She'd called out for her father who was traveling overseas. But Ethan had stayed by her bedside until she was stable. Half conscious and grateful, she'd whispered, "Thank you, Daddy," mistaking her rescuer for the father figure she'd needed in that moment. It became their secret joke during her recovery. She'd call him Daddy and he'd laugh, saying she must have hit her head harder than they thought. Now, 8 years later, watching him being humiliated by people who weren't fit to shine his shoes, Sophia Lane made a decision that would change everything. She kicked off her designer heels and ran. Down the marble steps of the stage, her evening gown flowing behind her like liquid gold. Past the shocked orchestra, through the crowd of frozen socialites, straight toward the man who'd given her a second chance at life. Her voice rang out clear and strong across the ballroom. Daddy! The effect was instantaneous. Every conversation died. Every champagne glass paused halfway to painted lips. Every cruel laugh choked off into stunned silence. The woman who'd made the McDonald's comment stood with her mouth open like a fish. The photographer's camera dropped to his side, forgotten. Richard Lane, watching from the head table, felt his blood pressure spike as his composed, professional daughter threw her arms around a man in a second-hand suit. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Would you have walked away or stayed to fight? Tell us what you would do below. The silence that followed Sophia's cry was deafening. 500 of the city's most powerful people stood frozen, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Their composed, untouchable CEO had just called a man in a thrift store suit, "Daddy, what the hell is going on?" Richard Lane's voice cut through the stunned quiet like a blade. He rose from the head table, his face a mask of confusion and barely controlled rage. Sophia ignored her father completely. Her arms were wrapped around Ethan's neck, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, ruining makeup that had taken an hour to apply. "I can't believe it's really you," she whispered against his shoulder. "I've been looking for you for 8 years. Ethan stood rigid, overwhelmed by the sudden attention of hundreds of eyes. Lily clung to his leg, equally confused but sensing this woman was somehow important. "Sophia," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. You're Richard Lane's daughter." "I don't care who she is," the woman in pearls hissed to her companion. "This is clearly some kind of publicity stunt." But others in the crowd were starting to remember. Whispers began to ripple through the ballroom like wildfire. "Wait, didn't she have an accident in college? Something about a fire? She was in the hospital for weeks." Sophia pulled back, her hands still gripping Ethan's arms as if he might disappear again. She turned to face the crowd, her voice carrying the authority that came with running a billion-dollar foundation. 8 years ago, I was a sophomore at State University. I lived in Crawford Hall, 3rd floor. Her voice grew stronger with each word. On the night of November 15th, an electrical fire started in the basement. The smoke alarms malfunctioned. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the building was already filling with smoke. The ballroom was completely silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving. I was trapped in my room. The hallway was black with smoke. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. Sophia's voice cracked, but she continued. "Then this man broke down my door." She gestured toward Ethan, who was shaking his head, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Ethan Hale carried me down 3 flights of stairs through smoke so thick you couldn't see your own hand. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know my family had money. He risked his life for a complete stranger because that's who he is." Richard Lane's face had gone pale. He remembered that night, the frantic phone call from the hospital, racing across the country to find his daughter unconscious, her lungs full of smoke. "When I woke up in the hospital," Sophia continued, "I was alone and scared. My father was flying back from Tokyo. My mother was already gone. But Ethan stayed with me. He held my hand and told me I was going to be safe." She laughed through her tears, the sound echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "I was so disoriented from the smoke inhalation. I kept calling him Daddy. He thought it was the funniest thing. 'You must have hit your head harder than we thought,' he'd say, but he never left my side until my father arrived." The crowd was mesmerized. This wasn't the composed, professional Sophia Lane they knew. This was a woman stripped raw by memory and gratitude. "For 3 days while I recovered, he was more of a father to me than—" She glanced at Richard, then stopped herself. "He was everything I needed when I needed it most." Ethan finally found his voice. "Sophia, I just did what anyone would do." "No," she said firmly, turning back to him. "You didn't. 12 other people lived on that floor. 11 of them made it out on their own. One chose to run back in for someone else. That was you." The woman who'd made the McDonald's comment earlier looked like she wanted to disappear into the marble floor. The photographer who'd been so eager to humiliate them was now frantically taking pictures of the reunion. "But why?" Richard Lane's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Sophia turned to face her father, years of complicated feelings flashing across her face. Because I knew you'd try to buy him, offer him money, a job, something to make yourself feel better. But Ethan wasn't looking for a reward. He never even told me his last name. When I was released from the hospital, he was gone. She looked back at Ethan, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I hired private investigators. I searched social media. I tried everything. I wanted to thank you properly, to make sure you were okay, but it was like you'd vanished. Ethan's own eyes were wet now. He'd never known she'd been looking for him. He'd assumed she'd forgotten all about the broke college student who'd stumbled into her life during the worst night of his own. I had to drop out that semester, he admitted. My dad got sick, and I needed to work full-time to help with medical bills. Then Sarah got pregnant with Lily, and life happened. Sarah, Sophia's voice was gentle. My wife. She died 2 years ago. Ethan's voice broke on the words he still struggled to say out loud. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. For the first time since this surreal evening began, Lily spoke up. Her small voice cut through the heavy silence. Daddy says Mommy is watching the pretty lights with the angels now. The simple, innocent words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Several women dabbed at their eyes with designer handkerchiefs. Sophia knelt down to Lily's level, her expensive gown pooling around her on the marble floor. Hi, sweetheart. I'm Sophia. Your daddy saved my life once upon a time. Lily studied her with the serious intensity only children can manage. Are you a princess? You have a princess dress. Sophia laughed, the sound bright and genuine. I guess I am tonight. And you know what? I think your daddy is the bravest knight in the whole kingdom. The crowd watched, transfixed, as their untouchable CEO sat on the floor in her $1,000 gown, completely captivated by a 7-year-old in a grocery store dress. Richard Lane stood frozen, watching his daughter interact with the child of a man he'd never heard of, feeling like a stranger in his own life. The ballroom held its collective breath, sensing that everything was about to change. The transformation in the ballroom was instantaneous and complete. The same crowd that had been sneering and laughing moments before now stood in stunned, shame-faced silence. Richard Lane walked slowly toward the group, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble with each deliberate step. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea, everyone holding their breath. When he reached Ethan, he stopped. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, the billionaire and the struggling single father. Two different worlds colliding in the space between heartbeats. You saved my daughter's life, Richard said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. Ethan straightened his shoulders. Any father would have done the same. No. Richard shook his head slowly. They wouldn't have. And I know because I've spent 30 years surrounded by people who wouldn't cross the street to help a stranger, let alone run into a burning building. He extended his hand. Ethan hesitated for just a moment before taking it. Thank you, Richard said simply. Thank you for bringing her back to me. The crowd began to murmur. But it was different now. Instead of cruel gossip, there were whispers of admiration and regret. Did you see how he carried his daughter? That suit might be old, but look how clean it is. The man has dignity. I feel terrible about what we said. The woman in pearls stepped forward, her face flushed with shame. Sir, I owe you an apology. What I said was inexcusable. More voices joined in, a chorus of remorse from people who'd learned a harsh lesson about judging others. But Sophia wasn't finished. She stood gracefully, smoothing down her gown, and walked to the microphone on the stage. Her heels clicked with purpose as she climbed the steps. Ladies and gentlemen, her voice rang out clear and strong through the sound system. Tonight was supposed to be about charity, about giving back to those who need our help. She paused and letting her words sink in. Instead, we forgot the most basic rule of humanity. Treat others the way you'd want to be treated. This man, she gestured toward Ethan, embodies everything this gala is supposed to represent. Selflessness, courage, love. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but they listened. 8 years ago, he saved my life without knowing who I was or what my family could do for him. Tonight, you treated him like he was less than human because of the suit he wore. Her voice rose with passion. But let me tell you what I see when I look at Ethan Hale. I see a man who works 3 jobs to provide for his daughter. I see someone who lost everything but never lost his dignity. I see the kind of father every child deserves, and the kind of man every woman hopes to find. Applause began slowly, tentatively, then built to a thunderous roar. People were crying openly now, moved by the raw truth of her words. Lily tugged on Ethan's jacket. "Daddy, why is everyone clapping?" Ethan knelt down and pulled her close. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, people remember how to be good." The photographer who'd been so eager to embarrass them earlier now approached with tears in his eyes. "Sir, I'd like to delete those photos I took earlier, and if it's okay with you, I'd love to take some proper ones. This is the real story tonight." As the evening continued, something magical happened. The walls came down, rich and poor mingled together, sharing stories and laughter. The charity gala had found its heart. As the evening wound down, the crowd began to disperse, but the warmth lingered like the glow of candlelight after the flame has been blown out. Richard Lane approached Ethan one final time, his face softer than it had been all night. "I want to offer you a job," he said quietly. "Something worthy of who you are." Ethan shook his head gently but firmly. "Mr. Lane, I appreciate the gesture. I really do. But I don't need rescue. I just need a fair chance to take care of my daughter myself." Richard studied him for a long moment, then nodded with something that looked like respect. "You're a better man than most I know. If you ever change your mind, the door is always open." Sophia overheard the exchange and smiled. She knelt down next to Lily, who had been unusually quiet, taking everything in with wide, wondering eyes. "Lily, do you know what your daddy gave me?" The little girl shook her head. "He gave me my life back." "And do you know what you gave me tonight?" Another shake of the head, but Lily was clearly interested. "You showed me what real love looks like. The way you hold his hand, the way you look at him like he's the most important person in the world. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Lily smiled shyly and reached into her small purse, pulling out her father's broken pocket watch. She held it out to Sophia. "Daddy says heroes don't need time to work, because love remembers everything." Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she gently pushed the watch back toward Lily. "You keep that, sweetheart. Your daddy is right, and this belongs with its hero." As they prepared to leave, Ethan turned to address the moment that had changed everything. His voice was quiet but carried clearly through the now peaceful ballroom. "I walked in here tonight feeling like I didn't belong, like these weren't my people or my world." He paused, looking around at faces that now looked back with respect instead of scorn. "But I learned something important. Dignity isn't about the clothes you wear or the money in your bank account. It's about how you treat people when nobody's watching, and how you stand up for what's right when everybody is." He took Lily's hand and looked directly at the crowd. "My daughter will grow up knowing that respect isn't given based on wealth. It's earned through love, kindness, and doing the right thing even when it's hard." As father and daughter walked toward the exit, hand in hand, the entire ballroom began to applaud. It started slowly, then built into something thunderous and genuine. Outside, also under the soft glow of streetlights, Lily looked up at her father. "Daddy, are we rich now?" Ethan smiled and squeezed her hand gently. "We always were, sweetheart. We just forgot for a little while. Subscribe if you believe true family is built on love, not blood."